Holocaust survivor Max Eisen was born in 1929 in the town of Moldova nad Badvo, Czechoslovakia. In 2012, Eisen took it upon himself to write his personal memoir, By Chance Alone, which recounted his epic story of survival in Auschwitz during World War II. Since its release, Eisen's memoir has garnered several awards, including Canada Reads Best Book Award, and it is currently listed as an international bestseller. You can find Eisen's book, By Chance Alone, through any Target retailer in the United States. The following interview was conducted by Southeastern Louisiana University history graduate student and historian Joseph Ricci. It's been 76 years since Max Eisen was liberated from a concentration camp at the end of World War II. After surviving the Holocaust, Eisen relocated to Canada, where he began a successful career as a businessman and raised a family. Since 1991, Eisen has carried out a speaking tour that's brought him from classrooms from elementary through university level students. Each time, though, his story is the same. It is a story of survival, and it is a lesson for the future. I was privileged to speak with Max Eisen over a Zoom conference call due to the recent coronavirus outbreak. This was originally designed to be a panel discussion between faculty members at Southeastern Louisiana University and Hammond, Louisiana. However, this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to speak with a Holocaust survivor could not be taken for granted. Mr. Eisen, welcome. Thank you for being here with me over this conference call. And, without further ado, I think we can dive right in. Tell me, what was life like just before the war broke out?
Before the war, it was Czechoslovakia, and my town of 5,000 people was a town in a rural area. Jewish people have lived there for many, many generations. In fact, for 1,000 years probably. It was the old Austro-Hungarian monarchy, and it became Czechoslovakia in 1919. It was a democratic country, and so Jews practically made the town work. I remember the Jewish people that were in my town. They were storekeepers. They were selling yard goods, general store. There were two Jewish doctors in town. There was a Jewish dentist. And so Jews practically made the town work. My family was middle-class family, and we lived in a large building, 3 families, my grandparents, my paternal grandparents, and my uncle and aunt. And it was an L-shaped building, and my parents, I had 2 younger brothers and a baby sister. She was born in 1943. Of course, we went to public school, and the Jewish kids went to Hebrew school. Every day after 4 o'clock, we were let out from public school. A half an hour later, we were in Hebrew school till 7 o'clock. And life was wonderful. I did not experience any anti-Semitism. We were ethnic Hungarians. We all spoke Hungarian. This is my mother tongue. Learned Slovak when I started school. We spoke German. Spoke 2, 3 languages, and had many friends. We had played lots of games. Soccer was the big thing, and we were very busy. And kids, and when I was 9 years old, my father was listening on his crystal radio. All his friends came to our house to listen to this speech that was delivered by Hitler from Berlin. It was a very famous speech. It's documented. And I remember this poison pouring out of the radio. And he said, if the Jews will start a war, we're going to eradicate the Jews from the face of continental Europe. I understood a few things. I couldn't fathom what it meant. I was 9 years old. But I remember the older people. My father was about 38, 39, and all his friends. They were sort of in shock, and I could feel that something was going to happen. And soon after that, Czechoslovakia declared martial law. There was a Munich conference where the fate of my country was decided by Britain and France and Italy in Munich. My country was delivered on a platter to a dictator without a single bullet being fired by a stroke of a pen. In hindsight, I believe that those two prime ministers of Great Britain and France, they didn't have a backbone, and they signed on to the Second World War.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, that's so we know from the diaries that all these leaders kept. Um, so we were detached. My maternal family were stuck in the autonomous country of Slovakia, and we were now stuck in Hungary. We could never see each other anymore. My maternal family were the larger part of my family. I used to go to my grandmother's big farm where I used to meet my cousins. Every summer there were 8, 10, 12 grandchildren there on this big farm. So after 38, that was the last year I was there. Never saw them again after that. So Hungarians come in, gendarmes, bureaucracy, and teachers. They're replacing all the Slovak teachers, police, and bureaucrats. And they brought with them the racial laws, which it was Jewish stores were confiscated. Jews had to live by the rules. They were dictated. These edicts were posted in my town on a daily basis. So they went after our businesses, our livelihood. Able-bodied Jewish men from 18 to 45 had to report to labor battalions. So systematically, we were removed from our lifestyle. 41, I guess, when these laws came out, and the Jews couldn't employ non-Jewish people. My father's business, he had a distillery and a drinking place called the Cellar, was simply taken over by a neighbor without any confiscation, without any compensation. So Jews had absolutely no rights to anything. We were demonized, dehumanized, and wearing a yellow star. I was 12 and a half years old. We Jewish kids were thrown out of school. Hungarian teachers were terrible Jew haters. They were beating the tar out of us. We Jewish kids were made to sit in the back of the classroom. So we were segregated from the rest of the students. It was a big fight every morning going to school. How things changed. This would have never happened under the Czechoslovakian system, but under the Hungarians, they even encouraged the students, the non-Jewish people, to. So this was our coming to school every morning. It was a big battle. We were less than 10% of the student body, and so I was, a few of us were kicked out of school. I was 12 and a half, and my mother took me away to the capital city of our province, and I became an apprentice.
You went from having never experienced anti-Semitism to being persecuted every day. That had to be quite a shock.
That was a big shock. Yeah. From being a normal child, being able to walk on the street from my home, which had to go in. We sort of lived in a suburb. My grandfather had a lumber yard, so and his lumber yard was not far from the railway station. He used to get shipments of roof tiles, and so we lived in the suburbs. So that walk from my home to the school under the Hungarians wearing yellow stuff was quite an ordeal every day. And that was a rude awakening. And so we could not communicate or send any letters to our maternal family in Slovakia.
Mhm.
Slovakia was ruled by a fascist government. The head of it was a Dr. Joseph Tiso. In fact, the Slovak Jews were the first Jewish people who were ripped out from their homes in 1942, around May of 42, I believe, and shipped off, and they simply disappeared. We didn't know what happened to them. So my father isn't there at home. My uncle isn't at home. My grandfather was always the head of the family, and he was a strong man. My grandfather was a non-commissioned officer in the Austro-Hungarian cavalry in the First World War. And he was a man of the land who taught me a lot of skills, which it turned out to be truly my savior, when I wound up in the camp for 1 year as a slave laborer. And of course, my mother was our guardian angel, and a lot of things changed suddenly, drastically. And So in 1942, my maternal family is gone. In 42, not knowing what happened to 1942, the Nazis, they're at the apex of their glory. They occupied the entire continent of Europe. They called it Festum Europa, Fortress Europa. We didn't know. Everything was censored by the government. And see that a machinery of propaganda and deception, and that worked their game. And so 43, my aunt died. It was a year of death and birth. My mother gave birth to a little girl in August of 43, and it was not a good year for a Jewish mother or a Jewish child to be born. So she had an additional tremendous responsibility to raise a baby. She had a helper whose name was Anna. Jews could not employ non-Jewish people, so Anna had to leave. She didn't want to leave, but she was forcibly removed. And we lived in a beautiful home, but everything was much more difficult than what we know here.
Mm-hmm.
Here you turn on a tap and water comes out. We had to bring in water from the well.
Mm-hmm.
You turn on the thermostat and heat comes out. We had a wood stove. She had a beautiful wood stove. And every bedroom had a fireplace that was stoked up in the evening, in the winter, kept us warm. It was a lot of work. And so that was 43. It was, we still didn't know.
Now you've already gone through so much at this point, and then you're deported for the first time. So in total, you've faced deportation twice, correct?
We were, they were, Hungary deported about 40,000 Jews who they said that they were not Hungarian citizens. See, my family lived in that part of Hungary for generations. And my mother, my maternal family were now in Slovakia, so they were called not Hungarian citizens. It's crazy. So we were removed from our home, my mother, my two little brothers, and my aunt, and put on a transport and taken up to the Carpathian Mountains. And we didn't know what was happening to us. I know, I knew after I found out, all these Hungarian Jews were taken to a place in the occupied Ukraine, Kamenets-Podolsk, where the SS Einsatzgruppen were operating. They were shooting people at the Dniester River, and they were floating like leaves in the on the water. And we were the last transport. We were brought back home. We were brought out from the jaws of destruction. I will never forget that. I will
Did that
never
give you
forget.
a false sense of security at all?
Pardon?
Did that give you a false sense of security at all?
No, while we were away, we were on the Carpathian Mountains in a big lumber mill. See, the Carpathians, there were forests and they were cutting lumber. And so we were in this lumber yard. I don't know how many of us. There were thousands of names written on the walls of the boards of the shed, names of families. All in 1944, we were taken to Kamenets-Podolsk. The dates, we put our date off, and the day when we were moved, loaded onto trucks. And lo and behold, we were brought back to the camp, and we had to pay our fare back home. And I arrived back in my home, and my grandfather and grandmother were not taken away because he was a officer. Imagine the craziness of this. And I will never forget that homecoming. It was like I'd been away in who knows where, and I came home in this beautiful home. It was a beautiful summer day, and I hugged every tree in the orchard, and my grandmother made an amazing meal. My friends came to see me, and we went to swim in the river, and it was an amazing homecoming.
Mm-hmm.
And so 2 years later, the same thing happened, and I thought I had no. When we were put in those cattle cars and the doors were locked and bolted down, I knew that we're not going to come back from this trip.
Could you take me back to that last night, that Passover meal?
So it was 76 years ago. We were taken away from Hungary. April the 15th, we were ripped out from our home. It was Passover. We celebrated the first night of Passover 76 years ago. And we spent that night locked up in the school, 500 Jews, miserable, old babies, in shock. And in the morning, we were lined up in the schoolyard, and 500 Jews were walked to the railway station guarded by Hungarian gendarmes. And the town folks were spitting and yelling at us some terrible things. And I can't say that everybody was there. I don't know how many. That was not my main. I wasn't watching everybody who was there, but it was a terrible thing. They made the rabbi lead his flock out from the town. It was an exodus in reverse. Mothers were not allowed to have their carriages. So I remember my mother carrying a baby, one arm, bundle of clothes in the other arm, and a sheet with some utensils on her back. So 500 Jews were taken out. 480 didn't come back a year later. And less than 20 of us survived. There was only one mother, Mrs. Rosenberg, with two teenage daughters, returned. But this was a terrible price. And I came back a year later, and it seemed like I was away 1,000 years.
Entering into the camp, what was it like? What did you see? What did you feel?
Well, the entrance, we arrived in the middle of the night, and we were hauled out on the platform. The platform was lit up by floodlights, and there was a selection. They used a massive apparatus of deception. They told us that they are going to go for disinfection, like my mother, with her three children, my siblings, my grandparents, my father, and my uncle and I were selected for slave labor. We didn't know what that meant. They said, you will see them tomorrow. You see, that deception kept working away. And imagine people who were locked up for 4 days in a cattle car. We were zombies. We couldn't think. Our bodies were depleted. And so we wound up in a barrack. We were put through an ordeal. Our clothes were taken away from us. You were stark naked. The only thing you had were your shoes, were your boots. I put through a shower in the barrack. Triple tier bunks. This was the first time I saw a triple tier bunk. And had a few hours, I guess, rest. It was on wooden planks. And next morning we were hauled out from the barracks. Outside it was May the 8th, 1944. And I saw this huge place with hundreds of buildings, barracks, and 4 huge chimneys, fire and smoke belching, and didn't know what it was. So imagine a bunch of naked people, and that is, thinking back, you're naked, you're very helpless, and 2 men in their striped outfits, a canister of liquid. This was the first drink I had in 4 days. And my father asked them, are we going to see our families today? So they said, where you come from? From Hungary. And they said, you don't know, in 1944, you don't know what this place is all about. Your families have gone up through the chimney. We didn't know what this meant. I couldn't understand why a person would want to go to the chimney. So 100 of us were selected. We were given a tattooed numbers and the striped outfits, and you were no longer a human being. You were only a number. 100 of us were selected, marched down to Auschwitz I, became a slave labor working for the Nazis. So I was very fortunate that my father and uncle were with me. We were together for 2 months till July. And selections began because there was no more work to be done. The Soviet army was coming from the east. One night, my father and uncle were selected out. And the next day, I only had seconds to say goodbye to them. They were in a quarantine area. So my father gave me a blessing, and he told me that if I managed to survive, I have to tell the world what happened here. And I was devastated and never saw them again.
How did you come to find yourself in the hospital in Barrack 21?
And a few weeks later, I had a hit from an SS guard on my back of my head, and I lost a lot of blood. I went into shock. I was thrown into a ditch, and I knew that my life was over. So it was truly by chance. I was hauled back to camp in a two-wheeler with all our tools, shovels, and picks and things. And I was taken to the surgery department in Auschwitz 1, Barrack 21. And I was operated on. I mean, I was totally out. I didn't know what was happening to me. I woke up the next morning. I was in a bed in the ward upstairs. So everybody knew that you don't want to go to the operating room or to the hospital because the next step from there was the gas chamber. So the thing was that if you couldn't walk away 2 days later, you were taken away to the gas chamber. And the only reason they had a surgery and the hospital, it was a deception on their part. They brought the International Red Cross and showed them, look, we take good care of our people. They went to great lengths to cover up. So I was put on a stretcher. They were taking me to a truck. They were going through the hall, and there was a prep room for the surgery. There was a person in a white coat, and he stopped the stretcher. They took me off, and he brought me into the prep room. I was stark naked, and he gave me a lab coat. And he said, "You'll be the cleaner here." He was a Dr. Tadeusz Rzeszko. He was the chief surgeon, and his assistant was a Dr. Sobieszczanski. These were two political prisoners, Polish political prisoners. They were both in the Polish underground. They were arrested a year and a half before by the Gestapo. And so I worked for him for 6 months, and that was truly my good fortune. I wouldn't be here had he not done that. So I didn't have to suffer the beatings from the couples out on the work job.
In Auschwitz at around the same time as the Sonderkommando uprising?
I knew we could hear shooting was happening, and the siren went on. But the siren was a signal that there was an escape, and everything was tightened up on the guard posts all around Auschwitz. And we were made to stand at appel until they got the numbers of how many people. You see, numbers were very important for them. Every day there was an appel in the morning before you went to work, when you came in. So this is what I knew what happened. So, but it was an amazing thing. They were able to get some explosives from the big German factory where girls were working from Birkenau, working in this big place. They managed to get every day some explosives that they smuggled out, and they got it into the Sonderkommando in the crematorium. And so they built some very rudimentary little Molotov cocktails, sardine cans stuffed with some explosives, and they were throwing it down at the SS men when they arrived. You see, what happened, I think it started every Sonderkommando, these were the people who worked in the gas chambers and crematoria, they were rotated every 60 days. So they knew that their time was up. So they locked the gates, and the SS came marching in, and they started the fire in the attic of the crematoria, and they started to throw these Molotov cocktails at the SS. So I knew that this was a buzz that went all around, and we just expected all kinds of, there were ramifications for everything. There was a punishment to be paid for by everybody else. So in November, all the other 3 remaining gas chambers and crematoria were blown up. This was by the order of High Command. They didn't want to leave any evidence behind, and that we knew. And I breathed a sigh of relief, and I said, well, I know that I'm not going to die by gas, but there's many other ways to die. So my life is improved since July, when I was working in the hospital for 6 months. And so I was sticking around the hospital and the surgery. I was very busy. I was the one person taking care of this surgery department, and we were operating every day except Sunday. And it was a lot of work for me to do. And I think that the skills that I was given by my grandfather and my father and my mother, they've really helped me a great deal to survive that ordeal. I was able to focus and plan and determined and resilient. And I would never ever give up, you know. See, I was at a trial of two SS guards who were stationed in Auschwitz when the Hungarian transports arrived in 44. One was Oscar Gröning, who was called a bookkeeper of Auschwitz. In 2015 and 2016, there was a Reinhard Hanning, and Gröning was charged with being an accessory in the death of 300,000 Hungarian Jews. And Henning was charged by being an accessory in the death of 150,000 Hungarian Jews. And I was at their trial, and they both received 4 years. So Gröning, they both said that they were there, and they saw it, they heard it, they smelled it, but they were not part of the killing machine. And they were, I think, both of them were about 96 years old. And what Oscar Gröning did, he was carrying the loot in a metal suitcase from Birkenau to Berlin. You see, the Nazis were determined to find everything that these transports brought with them. They took away their clothes, cleaned them, sent them to fatherland, and they checked every bundle that people brought with them. People would hide currency in the shoulder pads or in a little jar of jam they would put in a chain, a gold chain, or they would bake a gold coin into a little Kaiser bun or a piece of bread. They were determined to find everything, and they found millions of dollars worth of gold. The gold teeth and fillings were removed after the bodies were gassed. Body orifices were slit open. They were going to find everything that people had in their mouth and inside their body. And the gold was melted down. And Oscar Gröning was taking this loot in a metal suitcase 2 or 3 times a week to Berlin. So he was asked. We were witnesses from Canada, US, Hungary, and Israel. And a German retired judge was in charge of our case. You see, his name is Thomas Walter. So he asked Oscar Gröning, you took all these suitcases full of gold and things. Did you ever receive a receipt? Where did you take it? He said, I took it to Berlin, to the Reichsbank. He said, did you ever receive a receipt? He says, no. He said, did you ever take any money out from the till? I mean, this man was handling a lot of gold crowns that were, and he said, no. So he said, look, 20 years ago, you gave an interview to BBC and you said that you took some money out to buy a Luger pistol on the black market. I said, oh, I forgot about that. But Oscar Gröning said a lot of terrible things that really upset me a great deal. Thomas Walter asked him, did a Jew have a chance to leave Auschwitz alive? He says, absolutely not. And he described the situation. Imagine a transport arrives from Hungary. First of all, less than 3 months, 450,000 Hungarian Jews were gassed in Birkenau, Auschwitz, including my family and my mother with her 3 children. And this is something I can never get over. 2,000 people were stuffed into a gas chamber. Can you imagine? Who would have thought this is in continental, in the cultured old world of Europe? So he describes A transport arrived from Hungary, 4,500 to 5,000 Jews. This was the order. They had a systematically figured out how they have to handle the loads of people. That every gas chamber crematoria has to be busy, nonstop. So all the people are selected out fast. He said, Gröning said, we had to do everything in an orderly fashion. He was pulling 24-hour, 2 shifts on the platform because sometimes there were 3 transports inside Birkenau. They put in 2 extra tracks for Hungarian Jews. And we didn't want the other 2 transports to see what was happening. So they had to get people, select them fast. And then inmates arrive and they empty the cattle cars, and the goods are there. And 50 piles of goods are in front of every cattle car. See? You have 50 piles of goods. The people are gone, the trucks arrive, and the inmates have to load all these goods onto these trucks, and everything is taken to some barracks that was called Canada. This is where everything was open and gone through meticulously. So he says, my comrade and I, we are patrolling the platform. Yes, they had to watch these inmates. He says, we had to watch them. They were crooks. They were stealing from the bundles. Can you imagine? The mindset of this evil man who said stealing was a terrible thing. But gassing people by the millions, that was all right. And here I am sitting there, we were in total shock. We couldn't believe. They both received 4 years, and they both died last year. You probably heard the name Dr. Mengele, who was also called the angel of death. They medical experiments, these were doctors who swore the Hippocratic Oath. And medical experiments on twins. They wanted to know how each German woman could have multiple births. So these were the doctors who worked with Dr. Mengele. 2 surgeons in the surgery, Dr. Rajeshko and his assistant. They also took the Hippocratic Oath. And we were operating on people, they were absolutely no hope of surviving. And these 2 doctors had to do the right thing and put these people together for 2 days. And they knew that they're going to wind up in a gas chamber. And this was a difference, people that took the Hippocratic Oath and they lived by it, and others who simply forgot about it. And women were given high doses of x-rays so they couldn't have babies. I saw teenagers who were castrated, and body parts were shipped from here to all the teaching universities.
Can you describe the arrival into Abenzi there in April 45? What was it like? What did you see?
I mean, everything was falling apart. I mean, bombing. Everything was, American flies were bombing. Typhus broke out in the camp. About 3 weeks before liberation, they locked the camp and they threw away the keys. There was no more rations given to us, the 300 calories. The water system broke down, and typhus broke out. We were infested with lice. And I was barely hanging on. By May the 6th, I was in a lower bunk. I couldn't stand up. I became a skeleton. You see, those last 3 months really finished me off almost. And I'm in a lower bunk having fever dreams, and a ghost comes walking in. I mean, that's an inmate. They looked like ghosts. They were skin and bones, and they couldn't lift their feet off the floor. They were shuffling in their wooden clogs, and he was mumbling away that the guards are no longer in the tower. And I wasn't sure whether I was hearing, is this right, or is he sane or not? And something told me that I need to crawl out of this bunk. If I don't, I wouldn't make it, because we're barely hanging by a thread. And our liberators, had they been an hour later, I don't think I would have been here. This is how urgent it was And so I crawled out, and I'm outside the barrack, and I could hear equipment grinding away, and I had no idea what was going on. And suddenly the gate came flying in. The big tank is coming through. It had a white star on it, and there were black soldiers sitting on the turret. And my first feeling was, my God, I'm liberated. And, because I knew that the end was coming, but I didn't know how the finale is going to happen. I figured they'll kill us all. And I will never forget the eyes of these soldiers. They were in total shock. I will never forget that. Their eyes were like they were looking at this, and the smell, which we couldn't smell. There were thousands of bodies, decomposing bodies. The crematoria were not working anymore. Square was full of bodies. And this was a unit called the 761st Black Panther Tank Battalion. They were attached to General Patton's Third Army. They came through the Battle of the Bulge. And I had the good fortune to meet Johnny Stevens, who was the squadron leader of, 10, 12 tanks. This was the first camp they liberated. They didn't know what it was. They just saw from down below that there's something up there with guard towers. So he sent a few tanks up there, go up there and see what's going on there. And so this was liberation. But, we were not free. Some were better off than others. There were many of us that couldn't get up on our feet, and that was really bad. And there was a terrible ordeal that we had to face after liberation, and simply your health was, you were in terrible shape. And it took me a couple of months just before I was able to leave the camp. And an American Army truck took us to Czechoslovakia, the town called České Budějovice. We arrived there on a Sunday. We all had Hitler Youth shirts because the American Army couldn't find any civilian clothes. They found a huge warehouse of Hitler Youth shirts with a khaki color and corduroy breeches. And I'm going home. What is home? So the first time I came back, my mother and my two younger brothers and I, we were bringing our luggage with us. It was about a half-kilometer from the railway station. My mother sent a telegram to my grandfather that we're coming home. And we came around the stern, and that was the house. And we were a half-kilometers away, and the gates were open. We had a large gate for traffic for horse and buggies. And our station, his name was Farkas, which means a wolf in Hungarian, he came flying through the gate. He had a sense of smell, and he knew that he could smell us practically when we were a half-kilometer away. He wouldn't stop licking us. It was such an amazing homecoming. And here I'm getting a ride with a farmer on his buggy. I'm very sick. I couldn't lay down. I had water. I was retaining a lot of water. Water was choking. And I had to walk the last kilometer. And I'm walking towards this house. There was a place with 3 families just a year before. We had our dogs, Farkas station, and 2 fox terriers. We had chickens, geese, and ducks roaming all over the place. And it was a dead place. It was total quiet. There was nothing moving. There wasn't a single livestock left. I opened the door to my mother's kitchen. There was a neighbor sitting there. She didn't know who I was. And she wouldn't give me a glass of water. So I went to look for our neighbor who lived across the street from us, but the house was empty. Her name was Ili Klinka. She was a good friend of my mother and my aunt. And her son and I, we were in the same class. And she saw me and she just screamed out. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, And immediately she took away all my rags and burned them. I was full of lice. Honestly, God, I felt just so terrible. gave me a bath, and she knew that I have to be taken to the hospital. And she arranged with a farmer. You know, farmers and their teams of horses are working all day, and this was already in the afternoon, going towards evening. The farmers are coming back from the field about 7 o'clock or so, and she managed to get this farmer to take me to the hospital, which was about 50 kilometers away. He said, "Look, horses need some time to rest." We started out at 11 o'clock, and she gave me a bath. She did for me what my mother would have done had I come back from a terrible journey. And she told me, she gave me 4 pictures that she managed to save. See, the morning when we were taken out, ripped out from our homes, taken to the school, and we were sealed off in our town, every Jewish home was ransacked to the bare walls. She managed to save 4 pictures. And these were the biggest treasures that I brought with me when I came to Canada. Um, the synagogue was desecrated that night. The prayer books and the Talmudic books were put in a fire and torched. The Torah scrolls were taken out from the ark, cut into pieces and worse. It was a total, I mean, I cannot believe it, how our neighbors could have done things like that. So, and my battle started. I arrived in a hospital. Was St. Elizabeth Hospital in Košice, which is a Slovak Republic today. And the nurses were nuns, and they washed me, and they gave me a hospital, just a gown. And I was put into this beautiful bed with a beautiful mattress and clean sheets. And that was an amazing thing. I said, I don't ever want to leave this place. And I had pleurisy, wet pleurisy. I had water up to here. I couldn't breathe, and they had to siphon out with a huge needle water from the back, and I had to put the needle in between my ribs and just siphon water off. I think for about 2 weeks. I was put on a salt-free diet and no liquids. So when all that happened, I was a skeleton, and I had to start from scratch. You see, all this, I was blown up with all this water in my legs. So it was quite a hole. And I had some people, family, a person, Mr. Gottlieb, who came to visit the hospital every day or every second day. He wanted to see if there's anybody who's returning from the camps. And he asked me my name, and I told him. And as it happened, his mother and my grandfather were cousins. And he said, look, when you get out of the hospital, you'll come to our house. He survived with his son and 3 daughters who were hiding on Christian papers. And so I spent some months with them, and they put a few pounds on my ribs. And so it was quite a journey, the 3 years that I spent in Czechoslovakia after coming back from the camp.
It had to be a bit of a shock coming out of being liberated, and you see yourself as the only survivor of your family, and then you meet cousins and uncles.
Oh, this was the biggest shock coming back to my home. And here I am thinking of what this home was just a year ago. And how do you pick up the pieces? You see, and that was very difficult. The few months that I spent with them, and then I made some friends, and we heard about a orphanage that was opening up outside Prague in a place called Marienbad, which is it's a very world famous spa. And it said there's an orphanage or a yeshiva, which is a school of Jewish learning. And we said, let's go. And we had no money. We just got on the train and went. And I said, okay. So there were about 40 of us. And we had a roof over our head. And the American Joint Distribution Committee was supplying us with food. And so I became an apprentice working for a dentist in his lab. And I started to read books, all the classics in Czech. During the summer season, guests were coming from all over the world for treatments. And there was an orchestra playing classical music on the promenade. So I became civilized, in the 3 years. And then in 1948, suddenly Czechoslovakia was taken over. Overnight, we went to bed, turned on the radio the next morning, and we were in a communist country. And we knew that this is the end of the game here, and we had to grab our backpacks and move on. So these were hurdles that we had to face for a long time. We were caught, a few of us, and put in a jail, in the biggest jail in Prague, which was a political prison. You don't want to go to a political prison in a communist country. That is very serious business. Mm-hmm. And that was quite an experience, but I tell you, I figured, I'm here. I don't know how I'm going to get out of this dilemma. I was really in bad shape. I did get out, and my journey to get out of Czechoslovakia, I had to go to the American zone in Austria, go to the Canadian embassy, get a visa. Finally, I got a visa in 1949 in early October. I was the happiest guy. And I had to catch a train from Salzburg, Austria to Bremen in Germany with other DPs, were called DPs, displaced persons, and crossed the Atlantic and arrived in Quebec City in Canada, October the 25th, 1949. And that was 70 years ago that I arrived in Canada. There was a Jewish organization in Toronto that helped us out. They placed us with families. And then the Jewish Vocational Services sent us for jobs. I couldn't get a job as a dental technician, but it didn't matter. I just wanted to work. So we went to movies to learn English. We could go to a movie for a nickel. Our wages were 25 cents. And everything is relative, you see. And I met my future wife. She was 15 years old when we met. And we were married 2 years later. And I had a successful career in manufacturing, where I was in this business for about 40 some odd years. And then my sons took over. And in 1991, there was a person in Toronto who was a Holocaust denier. That was truly a shock. How things changed little by little, and suddenly it's become very serious, this hatred against Jews. So I got involved in speaking at schools. For the first 30 years, we didn't speak about it. Nobody wanted to hear it. So I must have spoken to hundreds of thousands of students, high school, university, military, police, and other groups. I would have never thought that one day I'm going to feel the same kind of a pressure, that we felt after occupation by the Hungarians. The hatred against Jews that has become so prevalent. So I just want to give you an incident. Selections in Auschwitz went on like this, in the middle of the night. You're sleeping the sleep of the dead. You come back from 12 hours of hard labor, and suddenly the loudspeakers are turned on, powerful loudspeakers in Auschwitz one, and it says, Achtung, Achtung, which means attention, attention. All inmates from these barracks run naked to this building for selection. There was no more deception. They told us selection, and we knew what selection was. In 2018, in Toronto. I had my poster of me, of my face, beside synagogues. And it said that the Jewish Federation supports Holocaust education. Somebody on a Friday night on the Sabbath came out from a hole somewhere and they put on a message on my forehead. It said, Achtung, attention. People said, oh, it's some crank. People, how many people would know what Achtung means if you don't know German? So that's serious now. And it's a poison that will consume everything. It started with words in Europe, and it ended in terrible places, in the gas chambers, in the fields where almost 3 million people were shot by bullets. I keep telling students and people that this is not a Jewish problem. It is a problem for the entire country. It is a problem for our way of life and our freedom. And there's another thing, there's boycott, divestment, and sanctions. You see. So boycott means excommunication. Divestment means expulsion. And sanctions means extermination. And they say, no, we're not anti-Semites, we are anti-Zionists, you see. So this is the kind of thing that I'm living in and thinking of, my gosh, this is come here to North America. And what kind of a thinking is this, you know? Mm-hmm. Canadians, Americans who went to fight this terrible Nazi ideology and they died there in cemeteries in France, in Belgium. They would be turning over in their graves if they see that all these things out of the handbook of Dr. Goebbels has come back to North America. It's outrageous. I mean, I could feel this the years that I started to speak in 91. And, you know, just little things come out in the local paper or in a caricature of a Jew. You know. I said, wow, isn't that something? And, you know, it starts with a little finger, then they take. So it's like a creeping sickness. It's a terrible disease. We live in a crazy world. I keep thinking of Viktor Frankl. You might have heard his name, Viktor Frankl. He was a Jewish psychologist. He was in Auschwitz. He was a Viennese Jew. He published this book. He survived. A small book. He was watching the people in the camp. Who were the people who survived? You had to be very tough. Imagine you're a skeleton and you have to go on every day, face the same ordeal. And you have to keep on going. Not many people just gave up. So they went into a deep depression. We call them Muslims for some reason. So he said in that book, those that had a why, they found the how. And what an amazing message this is for today. You need to be very focused to survive. So isn't this something, Viktor Frankl's observation from the camps and what's happening today? But we need to cooperate with each other. We shall overcome. Remembrance is very important. We have a thing, it's called the March of the Living. I don't know if you heard of that. It's a worldwide thing. It's a week after Passover, we teenagers and many non-Jews join us too. Don't have to be Jewish. But we go on the March of the Living, we go for a week to Poland. And there is a big event, remembrance, where the dignitaries come and it's a memorial service. And I go with different groups, with adult groups, I go with police and members of parliament and others, heads of school boards. Everybody needs to go to this place and see it. of what happens when good people stand by and do nothing. See, it starts with that and it ends in those places. So it is important. And sadly, I've seen polls recently here and maybe perhaps in the States too, I'm not sure. 50% of the population doesn't know what Auschwitz was and haven't heard of what the Holocaust was. And I keep saying that you need to remember. I keep saying that without history, there's no memory. And without memory, there is no future. So it's that important. And I can tell you that I have amazing letters from students. It's truly, I am so honored that I'm allowed to go to these high schools, universities, that they get it, And of course, my book, of course, helped. Um, I have amazing letters from students. When they feel down, they read my book. They read it twice, 3 times. We need to remember, we need to respect each other. I think it's the most important thing that they should be teaching in kindergarten, in schools and universities, the respect of each other, no matter what color, creed, religion. Wouldn't that be an amazing world if all these different races could go on? Just like in Jerusalem, where you see Jews, Christians, and Muslims on a Friday, they go to the Fridays are mosques, and Friday night the Jews, Sunday the church. Wouldn't that be something that priests, imams, and rabbis would be saying hello, have a wonderful holiday, and respect, because hatred is a terrible, terrible thing. So this is what I keep thinking. Maybe this test that we had, because here in North America, people have not gone through this kind of a thing. Europeans went through many wars, and here we were sort of lived in a wonderful climate. Maybe people will grow up and think about it, and will be respecting each other and more. So that's why I think that remembrance is very important. And it's the second generation and the third and the fourth. All those that heard the witness are the next witnesses.
I hope you've enjoyed this interview with Holocaust survivor, hero, and friend Max Eisen. You can find his book By Chance Alone on the shelves of any bookstore and online.